School of Management Studies IGNOU presents an audiobook on the course MMPC 007 Business Communication for MBA Program. Presenting Block 1 Introduction to Communication, Unit 2 Process of Communication, Part 1. In Part 1, we will learn about linear concept of communication, Shannon-Weaver model of communication, and two-way communication process. Let's listen to Part 1.
In this unit, we will understand the two-way communication process, comprehend the barriers to communication, understand ways to overcome barriers to communication. Introduction. As we know that communication is one of the most integral parts of any individual or an organization, there is a specific way to communicate effectively. Therefore, it is important for us to understand the process of human communication so as to avoid the common errors which take place in a communication. This unit discusses different models of communication to understand the process. There can be a one-way communication and a two-way communication. We will discuss different models to help us develop an understanding of how communication flows. Apart from these models, we will also discuss the barriers to communication. Linear concept of communication. The following 5 fundamental questions are asked in the early stages of communication. Who says? What is said? Where is it said? To whom it is said? With what effect it is said? The transmission of information from a sender to a recipient is considered to be a one-way process of communication. A receiver passively receives the message and acts as directed or requested by the sender according to the linear perspective. The goal of communication is to manipulate or control the receiver. It is assumed that the message reaches the receiver intact and unchanged as it travels through the medium chosen by the sender. Shannon-Weaver model of communication. C.E. Shannon and W. Weaver were among the first to point out that messages may be altered or blocked in the process of communication. Shannon's communication model is based on a mathematical or mechanical understanding of the communication process, with the fundamental issue being that the message received does not equal the message sent. Noise, he said, was to blame for the gap. Later, in 1949, the Shannon model was published in a mathematical theory of communication co-authored by Weaver. Weaver pioneered the use of feedback as a noise reduction technique. The Shannon-Weaver model, on the other hand, did not consider feedback to be an essential component since it saw communication as a linear process with feedback as a separate act of communication. Therefore, in the Shannon-Weaver model, a dotted line is used to represent feedback. The concept is predicated on the notion that communication takes place only after the message has been received and that it should be received as intact as possible. Of course, this is a theoretical notion of perfect communication. In real life, Filters in both the sender's and receiver's minds influence the meaning of the message. Feedback to some extent corrects any distortions and tends to complete the communication cycle. Source of information. The information source is the first step in the communication process. The sender has some unprocessed data. His or her goal is to turn the data into message that can be shared. The information source of the communication process is the source of a message. Encoding. The sender composes the message after giving it some thought, verbal symbol, or any other symbolic form of expression. Encoding is the term for this procedure. Channel of transmission. A channel is a suitable medium for sending a message, such as orally, in writing, electronically, in code, or via a signaling system. Decoding. Decoding involves receiving, comprehending, and interpreting the message. This is how a recipient receives the message. Acting. The communication process comes to a close when the receiver acts on an interpreted message just as the sender intended. As a result, we can observe that communication completes a full circle, bringing the sender and receiver together as both sides of the same coin. Modern management considers communication to be a vital ability for successful managers because of its uniting process and role. Noise. This mechanism is susceptible to noise, which can obstruct or distort communication, preventing the message from being sent from the transmitter to the receiver. Noise, according to certain communication theorists, refers to intrinsic disturbances in the physical environment around the act of communication, such as poor audio quality, phone dropouts, bad printouts, or unreadable writing. Filters. Filters are responsible for communication distortion induced by subjective elements such as the sender's and receiver's attitudes. These are psychological in nature. Attitudes, beliefs, experiences, self-awareness, and the ability to think coherently are among them. As the sender's communication travels through the receiver's filters, which are made up of his or her experience, knowledge, and sentiments, misinterpretations and other issues may occur. Two-way communication process. Communication is now viewed as a two-way process in later conceptualizations of the process. The receiver also serves as the sender of feedback to the transmitter to complete the communication cycle. As in telemarketing or call center communication, both the sender and the recipient play a reciprocal and reversible role. The two-way approach is more modern. It views communication as primarily a reciprocal process involving the exchange of messages. Because the sender and receiver are often the same individual, there is no clear separation between the two positions. The sender is considered as the determiner of the message's meaning in the previous linear perspective. The two-way notion incorporates the receiver as an active participant in the message's development and interpretation. The message is how the recipient interprets it based on his or her own experiences, beliefs, and feelings. People who have worked together and formed common attitudes and perspectives with regard to the organization they work in or the community they live in may have common interpretations of circumstances, ideas, strategies, and events. Transactional communication is another name for two-way communication. Barriers to communication. In any type of communication process, there are certain barriers which need to be understood so that they can be removed or avoided to make the communication process effective. A barrier works like a sieve, allowing just a portion of the message to get through, preventing the intended reaction. You must understand how barriers work, why they generate misconceptions, and how to reduce their negative effects in order to communicate easily and successfully in a company, regardless of their position. How many times have you said, "I intended to say this but didn't," or "I meant to say that but didn't"? Communication obstacles arise even when we have the greatest of intentions and our written and spoken messages are misconstrued. These sorts of obstacles can be categorized as: first, intrapersonal; second, interpersonal; third, organizational. Intrapersonal barriers. Because of variance in views, experiences, education, culture, and personality, each individual is unique. As our thinking differs, we perceive the same information in various ways. These distinctions are due to inherent or intrapersonal obstacles. Let us explore all the common causes that lead to these intrapersonal barriers. First, wrong assumptions. Second, varied perceptions. Third, differing background. Fourth, wrong inferences. Fifth, blocked categories. Sixth, categorical thinking. Wrong assumptions. Many roadblocks stem from erroneous assumptions. For example, a doctor who instructs a patient to take medicine only SOS, that is, in an emergency, without knowing if the patient knows the phrase SOS, is establishing a common barrier since the doctor has made an incorrect assumption about the patient's knowledge level. Wrong assumptions are frequently established because the sender or receiver lacks sufficient information of the other's history or believes erroneous notions that have been entrenched in his or her head. To strengthen your skills as a communicator, try to put yourself in the shoes of the listener. This exercise will prevent making wrong assumptions about the receiver. Varied perceptions. We all know the story of the 6 blind men and their description of an elephant. The elephant was perceived by each man as a fan, a robe, a snake, a sword, a wall, and a tree. None of the blind men were wrong, as the part of the elephant body touched by each man compared well with the various objects they named. This is how different individuals hold different viewpoints about the same situation. Similarly, individuals in an organization also perceive the same situation in different ways. It is all a matter of perception. The best way to overcome this barrier is to step back and take a wider, unbiased perspective of the issue. Differing backgrounds. There are no two people with the same background. Due to differences in the education, culture, language, environment, and socio-economic standing, backgrounds might differ. How we understand a message is heavily influenced by our background. It is important to understand the audience background in order to improve communication abilities. This information accordingly be used to construct the message. Empathy or identification with another person is a solution to this barrier. We must make an effort to understand what the listener can find incomprehensible in our message due to the difference of our background and that of the listener. The language understood by the receiver should be used to avoid ambiguity and reduce multiple meanings. Wrong inferences. Let us say you have just returned from a business trip and discovered that 2 of your co-workers are missing. They do not turn up for several days. Since there is a recession on, you draw an inference that they have been promoted and transferred to another department. This is an example of fact-inference confusion. It has happened because you failed to distinguish between what exactly exists and what you had assumed to exist. Because inferences are more dramatic than facts, they might give more opportunities for gossip and rumor to spread. It is critical that inferences be backed by facts when professionals evaluate materials, solve problems, and design processes. Blocked categories. In general, we only respond favorably to information that aligns with our own beliefs and attitudes. When we hear information that contradicts our personal beliefs, habits, or attitudes, or appears unfavorable to us, we are more likely to respond adversely or even dismiss it. The 3 common unpleasant and negative reactions to unwanted information are rejection, distortion, and avoidance. Communication and other technologies are advancing so rapidly that many people find it difficult to quickly adapt themselves to these developments. Instead of taking advantage of these developments, which help expedite the communication process, such people tend to resist and criticize them, which is a result of having a closed mind. Those who are adamant in their beliefs, on the other hand, may have difficulty communicating successfully. One of your classmates, for example, may believe that only science students are capable of thinking. Another may believe that young executives are more efficient than senior executives. These individuals are classified as blocked because they may be unable to tolerate any divergence from their point of view. Categorical thinking. People who believe they know everything about a subject will not accept any more knowledge of this subject. This way of thinking can be a huge roadblock, resulting in a barrier to communication. The use of the terms like all, always, everybody, everything, every time, and their opposites like none, never, nobody, and nothing is a hint to recognizing this barrier in ourselves and others. If a message contains too many of these words, then there is a fair chance of the communication getting distorted. To avoid this barrier, substitute these words with phrases like in most cases or most likely. Use terms like it appears to me or the evidence shows to label your viewpoint. If your data is sufficient, it is preferable to confess that you are uninformed of the remaining facts than to be vague.
You are listening to audiobook by School of Management Studies IGNOU for MBA program. Course code MMPC 007 Business Communication Unit 2 Part 1. Course Coordinator Professor Neeti Agrawal from School of Management Studies IGNOU. Voiceover by Santosh Bharati. Edited by Tarannum Jahan. Program assisted by Jagbandhu Jana. And program produced by Manoj Kumar Singh. This program was brought to you by Electronic Media Production Center of Indira Gandhi National Open University.